Good morning. Please join me in the call to worship. Please stand as well. We are drawn here by your presence, God, and we seek to lay hold of it. We gather to hear you and experience one another. We invite you to meet us where we are at and to bring us where we ought to go. And we commit ourselves to that journey. It's good to see everyone on this gorgeous fall morning, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are most welcome here. Be sure to visit the current art exhibit in the Fellowship Hall and Chapel Gallery installed by Print Arts Northwest. Eve's Circle will be going to Lansu Chinese Gardens this coming Saturday, and our very own Daniel Hunter will give us a VIP tour, followed by a visit to the Tea House. Please see our website announcements page for more on this. And I've been on Daniel's tour recently, and it was fabulous. A few other announcements. I want to thank everyone for bringing the soups, so please continue to do that on the first Sunday of every month. They are included in Clay Street Table's pantry that serves chiefly elder, low-income seniors. And speaking of Clay Table, I wanted to give you a quick update of our partnership with them. Beyond Soup Sunday, Paul has brought 3 groups of high schoolers from St. Mary's and Lincoln High School. The last 3 weeks, they've used our kitchen and organized the pantry. So it's just so wonderful to think of young people being in the building. Thank you also to those of you who have provided fellowship snacks throughout the year. Oddly enough, we don't have very many November and December birthdays. And remember, that's how we signed up to bring treats. So there are a lot of opportunities open if anyone would like to sign up. I have the sheets down on the table where we usually put the food. Let's see, is that it? I think it is. Today is our second all-church visioning session, immediately following worship, which will include a working lunch. Please plan to stay and participate in that. And I would also like to take this time to thank Judy, Susan, and Margaret for helping me prepare all that food, because they didn't really sign up. They're my friends, and I sort of made them. So anyway, thank you.
Let's take a moment now. Let's close our eyes, kind of take in a deep breath as we enter a moment of silence, center our thoughts and our hearts on God, and prepare to go to God in prayer. Holy One, as we've gathered here for several reasons, to see each other, to catch up on our lives, to be in this sacred place, we have also come to meet with you, to somehow encounter you, perhaps in a way that we have not before, but certainly in a way that allows us to take something home from our time here. And so we invite you to engage us that way, in a new way. You know us so much better than we know ourselves. You know our needs before we bring them to you. You know our desires before we ask. You know what gives us anxiety and vexes us, and what breaks our heart. For all of those joys and all of those challenges, we lean into the opportunity to grow from them both, to hold to every experience life gives us, that you give us, to find you and find ourselves in a new and deeper way. You say that we are in the palm of your hand, that you hold us there. And so in that place, we invite you to look at where we are at. Both we as individuals and the things that we are navigating in our individual lives, and we as a society in this nation, and the strife and the struggles that we are working through And we, as a civilization, as a global community who are wrestling with human values and how they are either pursued or denied on the world stage, we pray for those, and we join the millions and millions of others this day, even perhaps this hour, who are praying for those who are suffering from the onslaught of war, who are victims of violence. And for those, as we mention every week, who also are grieving and dealing with losses coming from natural disasters, things completely out of our control, but that have caused us to bend the knee, and for some of them not knowing what is next in their lives. Bring somehow peace to them. Bring resolution instead of resignation. Hold them as well. Make them aware of their place in the palm of your hand. And God, we think of those around us and those both in this room and in our faith community, as well as those outside of these doors that we encounter every day that we are in this city, who have different unique needs, who could use a touch from you. We lift those names or those people to you, silently or loud, in these moments. Holy One, as we lift you up and lift these up to you, lift us up to be able to see life and our circumstances through a different lens and bring joy into that picture. And we thank you for that. Amen.
Thank you. Our first reading comes from the book of Ezra, chapter 9. But now, for a brief moment, God has been gracious in leaving us a remnant and giving us a firm place in the sanctuary. And so our God gives light to our eyes and relief in our bondage. Though we are servants, our God has not forsaken us, but has shown us kindness in the sight of the world. The Lord has granted us a new life to rebuild the house of our God and repair its ruins, and has given us a wall of protection. Our next reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world, and a town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand so that it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify God in heaven. Finally, a combined exhortation from John Maxwell and Abraham Lincoln. You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. The greatest day in your life and mine is when we take total responsibility for our attitudes. That's the day we truly grow up. Here ends the readings from this morning. It's really an exciting time for First Congregational, with a new pastor and a congregation willing to engage in a shared future. Now is the moment when we can all share in supporting that future through the offering.
Well, this is different.
Yes, it is. I'm going to do my best Leslie Stahl or Diane Sawyer today.
If you're new here, I've already met a couple that are. This isn't our typical Sunday worship service, but we're delighted to have you. We also will not be having our typical fellowship time afterwards either. We're diving immediately into a really important conversation, a church-wide conversation. So, unfortunately, we won't have an opportunity to engage you the way we normally would. But please come back. It'll be much more normal next week.
So, good morning.
Good morning.
This is a time to try to get to know you a little bit better and to see what's sort of ahead for us as a church through the visioning process, the stewardship campaign, and then Advent, of course. So let's start with you. How have you adjusted to living in Portland, especially having come all the way from the Boston area?
Thank you for asking. I do have notes. I'm not reading verbatim, but there are things I wanted to make sure I didn't forget. I would say one of the reasons I've been looking to move to the Pacific Northwest for several years now is because it's, number one, it's a gorgeous part of the country. Portland specifically, it's grown in its reputation over the years to be a quirky city. And I'm a quirky guy. And so I felt like that would be a good pairing at some chapter in my life. So, and its quirkiness has not disappointed me, that's for sure. We haven't had enough rain to complain yet, but at least we're not having the snow that we're used to back in Boston. So that, although I have been told that rain is coming, like any day, any hour. I love my new house. It's in the Hollywood district. It's a Frank Lloyd Wright craftsman house, which I've loved that style since the 1990s. So that's been really great. I think one thing that's been challenging in terms of the move here is some of the crime that I've personally experienced, which was unexpected, even unexpected by my neighbors. So just for an example, my car got broken into 3 times just within the first month of living here, even as it sat right in front of my house. That was unexpected, and none of my neighbors understood because none of theirs were either. So it almost felt targeted, but I'm not quite that paranoid yet. But so that was actually an issue that was addressed here at the Mayoral Forum, which was we hosted a couple of weeks ago. I think that's another thing that's fascinating is just how many really awesome events we as a church and this place, the Sanctuary Hall, when it's not actually a sanctuary on Sundays, gets to be involved with in community events. So I think that's been an interesting part of the transition here too.
Great. Well, let's look at your time here from the angle of what's been your greatest joy since joining us here?
Well, I'm a big outdoorsman. I love hiking, I love camping, kayaking, and I would say right out of the gate, as soon as the weather was cooperating, I was hunting out the trails that didn't require a 2-hour drive to get to, and there are plenty. The Gorge, I'm still discovering new hiking trails, new waterfalls. That's been an awesome time. Some of you also know that I'm a bit of an amateur wine collector. I dragged my wine collection across the country back in late April. And so that's been fun, to explore the vineyards here. You're known here for Pinot Noir, which in California is not a well-liked wine compared to what California is really known. The reds, anyway, that California is really known for. But you are really known for your Pinot, and for those of you that know anything about red wine, you probably know that your Pinot Noir is much, much different than it is in California. And it's the first place that I've lived where I actually liked it. I even seek it out now, so that's probably way too much information on the line. As a side comment to that, I found a retired Jewish carpenter that worked with me on the design and then built a wine cellar in my basement. That was one of the first things I had done when I moved into the house. And I love telling people as a pastor that my wine cellar was built by a Jewish carpenter. If you're not sure about the connection, Jesus was a Jewish carpenter before he launched into his ministry. So anyway, kind of fitting. In terms of my experience of our church, the first thing in terms of, to answer the question about my joys is we and I have a fantastic staff. Staff that works with me during the week, staff that works behind the scenes and never is seen unless we need to engage them, and then staff that you see here working on Sunday mornings. I love the staff. I love their commitment to this place and their work ethic, their commitment to their job. That's been a real joy, with one notable exception, but we won't go into that. That's no one working here right now. I've also really loved not just observing, but able to engage the members' investment in our church. That has been a delight. An example of that would be the last visioning session that we did in September. We had, I think, 70 in worship, and 55 of those 70 were in that session. That is a remarkable percentage and buy-in to a process, and I'm really hoping that that kind of show-up is repeated today and next month. This is our and I'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes, but that was a great joy to see that level of interest in our future.
The food people were really worried we were going to run out of food, so I bought a little bit more this time. And let's go back to that house. Maybe an open house is in order for us all to get to see its craftsman.
Just as the rain is coming. That's perfect. Yeah, okay.
But the next question is sort of the flip side of that. What has been the greatest challenge being a new pastor here at First Congregational?
I would say two primary challenges, and they're related to each other. If not one causing the other, at least they are correlated. The first, and I'm just going to name this because it's no one's fault. Well, it's no one here's fault. For circumstances that were beyond our control, you and I really had our honeymoon stage stolen from us. I think we would have, with all things being equal, and with circumstances that were not overly stressed by outside circumstances that we absolutely had to address as both staff and lay leadership in the church. And some of you know more details about that than others. And there might be there might come a time where we can talk and we can give more details, and yet there might not be. But those administrative challenges started within the first 2 weeks of the job here, of arriving in February. And they ended up absorbing and requiring a lot of my time that wouldn't normally land on a pastor's desk. And to some degree, the demand, there is some kind of time demand with regard to that focus still to this day. And we're working through that. And again, that's where I've seen some of the most remarkable skill sets of our staff really come to surface, as well as tenacity and resilience. That's been wonderful. But my relationship, normally a pastor and a new pastor and their congregation have have kind of a 6-month to an 8-month honeymoon period where they're just really in each other's lives and they're figuring out the relationship, and there's a lot of bonding moments and a lot of even social times, and that was stolen from us. And that wasn't your fault, it wasn't my fault, it was somebody's fault, but we're not going to get into that. But that was taken, and I'm really hoping, and I have a little more comment on this in a few minutes, but I'm hoping that our visioning sessions would, besides looking at our future, are also an opportunity to give us an opportunity to kind of push reset on that button as well. Because we're figuring out our future together, not just your future. And so talking about that in that context might be an opportunity to have that bonding time again. I think the second thing that I would name and then just move on is that when pastors and churches, and I've seen this happen for 2 decades of being a consultant as well as a transitional pastor, when churches and pastors don't have that bonding time, and it was true here, criticism and gossip tend to surface early. And we didn't escape that phenomenon as well. And I think that's all I need to say about that, except that does tend to erode a relationship that's trying to develop, that's struggling to develop. And it only takes 1 or 2 well-placed people in order to have a much more exaggerated impact. And so that's been a challenge here too. Without the church getting to know me and me them the way that we normally would, assumptions start being made, and that's just human nature. But assumptions start being made about decisions or decision processes that are implemented that perhaps are not completely accurate because we haven't had that interactive time. And so again, I think by building our intimate time together as pastor and church, to some degree through these visiting sessions, but also through other things. I mean, Advent is going to be a fabulous time to do some of that, and it's going to be a really fun time and much lower intensity than how we've been addressing, how we've been engaging the fall. But I'm looking forward to that, and to just continuing to get to know each other around important issues.
Me too. Well, speaking of our current visioning process, you might remember that we went through, prior to Derek's tenure here, a number of sessions with Brigida and talking about our assets as a church and thinking of the future. And so my question is, how will the results of that process be integrated into our visioning process?
That's a great question, and I have seen that. I've seen the results of that, at least the way that they were collated. Some of them were a series of 10 text messages with photographs sent from Susan Rogers of all of the sticky notes that were applied to 10 different areas in Fellowship Hall. That was a great kind of window into what... I didn't just see the results, although I couldn't read all of them, but the fact that that was your approach, that was Pastor Brigida's approach, told me almost what that entire session looked like from beginning to end, just because I've done them for 20 years. The results, so one thing that I'm not going to do, our process is not going to just be another rehearsal of what you've done with previous pastors or previous consultants, and certainly not a rehearsal of what you did with Pastor Brigida. I think that work was really valuable. We are taking that, and you will be invited at some point in today's and November's session to take the information that was garnered there and apply it to the exercises that we are going to be engaging both today and next month. But I will say that it's going to be referential, and that our intention, my intention, is to take you on a much deeper dive in addressing the 5 questions that we discerned last month are the things we really need to be scoping out and looking and asking ourselves about our future. What will result in that, in terms of the results of your last time, the last time you went through a process like this, is that some of the assets that you came across, that you determined you had as a church, will be relevant, and then others you might not find to be as relevant as maybe they felt like they were back then. Now that we're trying to fit them into a scenario of questions that are requiring us to look at more deeply. This process is also going to require us to engage some out-of-the-box thinking, and an assets assessment is an excellent starting point, but we're going to go much further than that in our work together.
You might remember that we talked about the life cycle of a church, and you know a little bit about that concept. And so how is that relevant to First Congregational?
So yes, I do know a lot about the life cycles, what are called standardized periods or stages of the life cycle of a church. The one thing I want to say about that, since that was incorporated into your work the last time you did this kind of thing with Pastor Brigida, is that graph and that cycle of life that was determined, that was a graph that was created over 20 years ago. And when they did that, they did not anticipate both the acceleration of the closing or the dying of churches in the United States, nor did they anticipate a pandemic, which completely upended and utterly flipped upside down the experience of communal church in the United States, probably around the world, but certainly here. It flipped it upside down. And it added a technical component, a technological component it was a two-edged sword. That helped some churches thrive in the midst and after the more intense part of the pandemic, when we really had to lock down and then we had to engage some pretty serious protocols, health protocols. But for other churches, technology shut churches down because they couldn't afford it, number one, and number two, they found that the use of technology so bifurcated their congregation that they were like 2 different worshiping congregations. And it created an unanticipated and an unresolvable schism in the church that eventually some churches closed because of that. So it was a two-edged sword. Basically, if you're not familiar with the life cycle of a church, it comes in 7 stages. There's the birthing stage, or the kind of the launch. That's when a church is first created. Then there's the building momentum, followed by a growth stage. And then, so this creates kind of a bell curve. At the top, the peak experience of any church, according to this theory, is a stage called sustained health or sustained healthiness. And that's when all of the work done up until that point is now kind of just naturally, it is working like a well-oiled machine. It is constantly producing fruitfulness, both in terms of growth and in terms of depth. At some point, that becomes maintenance, when programs and finances become the greatest focus of a church. And now we're starting to come down the bell curve. And of course, this is along a timeline too. The stage after maintenance is preservation. That's when churches, most conversations that they have, either consciously or unconsciously, are about how do we keep the church open? How do we keep the finances flowing? Not so much how do we stay relevant, but how do we keep what we have? And then finally, the last stage is life support. which is basically, how do we keep from dying? Now, it's at that stage where churches and church leaders and pastors of churches have a great but very frightening opportunity to explore how, instead of inevitably closing your doors, how to reinvent ourselves and rebirth ourselves and start that life cycle over again. Now, I've taken churches through a discovery process of, related to the life cycles of churches. And I will say, and for 20 years, this is not a forecast of our work together. I certainly hope it's not a forecast. But I will say, in all the churches that I've pastored as a transitional minister, but also all the churches that I've done consulting work, purely as an outside agent, the majority of churches, once challenged, who are at the life support stage, once they are challenged with the notion of reinvention, opt out. They don't want to because they discover what the price tag attached will be for it. And we've talked about this before, at least I think I've mentioned it. There's a financial price tag and there's an emotional price tag. And most churches don't feel they can engage that price. And so they don't, and they eventually close those doors. We won't be talking about life cycles today, but we will in the November session. And the life cycle of a church, although on a micro scale, is a smaller version of something that we are exploring in our book study of Phyllis Tickle's book, The Great Emergence. That's on a macro scale. Every 500 years, the big C church goes through a big change that is thrust upon them by both religious as well as political, socioeconomic, and other forces in life that are unavoidable and intentional, that they are just the life of a civilization goes through these changes. And the church has to both lead in some of those changes and follow in others and be dragged into it in others. So we want as much control as we can muster in times of change that are thrust upon us, and that's why we're looking at all those things. But we will be looking at that with a very updated and kind of nuanced lens in terms of where are we going, where is God taking us, and how do we begin that life cycle again.
If you haven't been able to join the book study, The Great Emergence is just a fascinating book, especially I like the history in it. It's wonderful, so you might read it on your own. All right, so I'm going to take a detour, and I would love you to tell us something, maybe personal, maybe professional, but that we don't know about you and that you would like us to know.
Okay. Probably several things, probably more than you want to know, Paris, and certainly more than they want to know, but I thought I would just really kind of take kind of open the box here. Some of these things the leadership knows because we engage each other quite often, others not. Some of them are funny, some of these are tragic. I struggle with getting enough sleep, like many people do, but that's just something that I deal with. I would say while I have a strong work ethic, and I do, and strong commitment to work, I tend to be even more motivated to do well by relationships than I am purely about having good work product at the end of my day or at the end of the year. In other words, this is going to sound so either clingy or pathetic, but showing interest in me personally is a great way. It goes a long way to getting what you want out of me. I think it's my love language, although I haven't been able to practice a love language in far too long. But that's another subject I'm not going to unpack right now. But I would say, yeah, relationships really motivate me to do well. Another thing about me is, and some of you, whether you want to admit it or not, will relate to this. I have what I will, because we're in church, I will rename. So we would affectionately call it RBF, but for here, it's resting serious face. There's a different word for the second, but not in church and not on our broadcast, our live stream broadcast, but resting serious face. In other words, I'm often asked, are you okay? Not as much as 20 years ago, but either, are you upset or are you okay? Because the natural muscular of my face tends to make me look mad. And so it's not nearly as much as it was in my 20s and 30s, but it's still there. It makes me look very intense. And one of the unfortunate outcomes of that is that I unwittingly and unwillingly tend to intimidate people. It is never intentional, and I think maybe stated differently, at least on this point, at least I consider myself more approachable and more accessible than my face suggests I am in any given moment. And if that's something that you have read into me from afar, I would invite you and encourage you to push past that and come up to me like here, and you'll see me smile. Unless you're firing me, and then you might get a different face. But a couple other things, since we're talking about this. Worship and conversational meetings greatly energize me. I think part of that is because I'm a natural extrovert, although I think with everyone, COVID changed some of those dynamics for all of us. But I think I'm a natural extrovert, at least in some respects, and worship and conversation gatherings greatly energize me. What doesn't, and what zaps my energy, are monthly meetings, committee meetings, especially ones that have to happen on a computer screen. And so consequently, and I give the leadership a lot of credit, both I greatly admire them, but I also give them a lot of credit and gratitude for being flexible with me on this. I have had to, for some, not all, but for some of our meetings, our monthly meetings, I've had to put limits on how long I can stay in those meetings before my whole system just starts shutting down. Now, I don't mean I have narcolepsy or that I can't push past that, but it's just as a general rule of thumb with regard to time management, that's just something that we've discovered about me together. I hinted at this, and this is the last thing that I want to say about this is our visioning sessions and our entire visioning process, I am really looking at that as an opportunity to push reset on our relationship, on our bonding, on our chance to mutually discern a future. And I'm anxious to see how aligned our ideas might be with regard to where God is possibly taking us. So that would be it.
I'm down to my final two questions. Thinking about the visioning process, because we know that you've gone through this with other congregations, how is it different with us as our senior pastor?
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, every church, taking them through discovery process, which I've done with every church I've served in the last 20 years, which have been about 11 churches, as a transitional minister, as an interim minister. Every church is different. Their needs are different. Their discoveries about themselves and where they need to go as a result of trying to be responsible with those discoveries are all unique. And so consequently, the follow-up to those sessions are also unique. And I've hinted at this before, that the first session was going to provide us the fodder for knowing where we're going to go with the next one. Well, every church I've ever worked with, the second session is never similar to the first, because the follow-up is always specifically and custom designed organically to respond to the outcomes of the first session. And so it inevitably will take them in a different direction based on those results. But all that being said, I think the biggest difference with all the work I've done with previous churches and with ours, in contrast, is that, at least with regard to visioning discovery processes, my role was purely as a consultant. I was outside of the system, even though I was their pastor, when it came to helping them figure their future out and figure out what the stumbling blocks are as well. I was there as a consultant, mostly, helping them discern what their future was going to be. This is a settled, permanent position. And so it's not your future, but our future. So I also have a vested interest in what this is going to look like that goes beyond just my desire to do a good job in taking you through the process. I'm taking us through the process, and I'm as curious to see about what our future is going to be as you might be, hopefully that you are, and discovering it together, and then walking into that future together is completely new for me. Completely new. And related to that, perhaps one example of that is, and I think this might be more a matter of ethics than it is design, but I have never, with previous churches that I've taken through a visioning process like this, never given my opinion about what they were discovering. I have never weighed in with my 2 cents on what that future might need to look like. I've never added questions to the exercise that we did last month. What are the most important questions we should be asking? You came up with some marvelous answers to that question, but a couple are missing. As an interim, I would never tell you that. As a permanent pastor, I am not only telling you that, I plan on weaving those questions that I want to ask into our November session. So that is a huge difference for me in terms of how that plays out. Yeah.
Well, finally, how will today's gathering be different than the one last month?
That's easy. So the last session, for those of you that were there, we discerned what are the most important questions we should be asking in order to figure out where God is taking us and where we should be going with regard to our future. Today, we're going to be determining what is the best way to begin answering those questions. We're not going to be able to answer them today. That's a multi-month, perhaps even multi-year process, but we are going to begin determining together what might be the best way to answer those questions. What things do we have to rope in? What aspects of our church life together, what aspects of our collective education and experience will play a role in that? What aspects of the assets that you've already figured out, you've already determined from previous work are applicable to the answers to those questions? And what ones aren't? Where might we need to go differently? What else do we have to discern together? So discussing the components of that and figuring out how to do that effectively through multifaceted viewpoints is where we're going today, and that's very different from the last session. Doing an assets assessment is a valuable exercise. But needing to figure out what assets are relevant and what ones might not be. And then asking the question, what's missing? What assets are missing? What questions are missing? That's where today and the next session are going to go as well. Now, I have one question for you, because I think that's, since I wrote the questions, I think that's your last question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, it is.
Do you want to tell us about lunch today? You were so excited about what you were putting together for lunch.
So
tell us about lunch before we wrap this up.
Our team made a Greek salad. And then because of the idea of doing the meat just is too daunting to me. And so there's a new Greek restaurant in my neighborhood in West Lynn. And I went down and asked him, how much it would cost and if he'd be able to do that. And this man was so wonderful. He was just, in your church, I'll give you a discount. And he was just fabulous. And when you go to a business and you just think, I want to support you. Anyway, so I hope the chicken's good, but it's chicken kebab bites that you can put on top of the Greek salad, so it should be really good.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for putting all that together and putting all your team together. Let's stand for our closing song. Warren Bennis, organizational consultant and author who is the one regarded as the pioneer of contemporary leadership study and theory, said this: leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. And that is one role I intend to live into, and one role I will be engaging us to do so together. I'm going to invite you to sit for just a second. That's our benediction. Now, For our session today, I want to open up with C.J. Craig's words on the opening episode of the second season of West Wing. How do I know it in such detail? I've lost count of how many times I've watched that series. Decisions are made by those that what? Show up. Decisions are made by those that show up. Now, I was encouraged. I have a visioning team of 5 people that have been meeting with me and are going to be working with me downstairs during this session. 2 of them will be greeting you at the door, and they'll be doing something that we didn't do last time. They'll be giving you a table number. We have 8 tables, and we are wanting, at their recommendation, of spreading the wealth. We want to make sure that we are making every table as diverse in terms of its perspective and its perception as possible. So they are going to invite you as you come through. Margaret is one. Who's the other? Oh, I think she's already left. All right. They're going to be downstairs. They'll be asking you to sit at a table number that will be given you. Each table has a bright orange number on the middle of it, so there'll be no question as to what table they're referring to, okay? Please make your way to that table. Today's going to be a combination of table conversations, group decisions, and then reporting out of the findings. Some of that's similar from the last time, other aspects are a little different. And it is vitally important that you stay as long as you can. It's also just as important that if you know, out of the gate, that you can't stay until 2 o'clock, don't please decide that you can't come for any of it. Come and stay as long as you can and then leave when you absolutely have to. But please come and please stay as long as you can. We gave some parking instructions in our midweek email so that for those of you that have parking concerns, we tried to give you, this was their recommendation too, and I think it's a great one, we tried to set you up to succeed with regard to maneuvering those parking kitty signs, how to upload that or download that to your phone, how to manage those. Please utilize that information if parking is a concern. And I know that 1 o'clock is like, that's when everybody turns to pumpkins around here. So in order to stay past that, please utilize that information. I will be offering a reminder close to 1 o'clock for those of you that need to either start your parking kitty meter or need to upload it or add time to it, whatever. Okay? With all of that said, we are going to begin promptly at 11:45. Please be dismissed. God be with you. But God's only going downstairs, so please go with God to the downstairs fellowship hall. Thank you.